Want more than just the headlines? Find out what's going on and what it means with me, Dennis Prager, this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Amy under the weather, so just Dan. But it's been an eventful week. It's enough to make you sick, frankly. The theatrics and buffoonery on Capitol Hill. Mostly I'm talking about Democrats with respect to the Kavanaugh hearing. They're paid shriekers in the audience. A little bit of Alex Jones thrown in. And now, of course, the anonymous op-ed that has everybody scurrying around trying to identify the source. And by the way, this all subordinates and crowds out actual interesting stories that are substantive. President Trump, how many people heard this? Saw this story. In latest move to rein in the salaries and permanency of the administrative state, Trump announced he's not granting the usual 2%, 2.1%, in fact, pay hike for federal employees, which has Democrats shrieking because that's, of course, their only response to any opposition. Trump's letter notifying Congress yesterday, specifically, I've determined that for 2019, both across-the-board pay increases and local pay increases will be set at zero. The alternative pay plan decisions will not materially affect our ability to attract and retain a well-qualified federal workforce. Well, that's certainly true. You get paid 15% plus more than their private sector counterparts in most instances, plus the benefits package, plus the insulation from termination. But that's taking on the swamp. It's not the end-all, be-all, but it's indicative of a sustained effort. Remember, he signed 3 executive orders back in May that sought to provide more of a market test for federal employment, shall we say, in summary. For more on this topic, as well as the competing clown shows on Capitol Hill this week, we're pleased to be joined by Steve Cortes, CNN political commentator, served as the Trump Hispanic Advisory Council boss. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, good morning. Happy Friday. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And so I guess we have to start with the hysteria du jour, and that is identifying the anonymous op-ed writer. How obsessed do you think Trump should be? How much more air should he give this anonymous op-ed?
You know, I don't think a whole lot from here. I hope he doesn't. But I will say this, too. I think perversely, it is, I think to some degree, working in his favor. And, you know, I think so in 2 ways. Number one, I think the fact that the New York Times was willing to publish it, was willing to show, you know, really no standards and put an anonymous op-ed on its pages, which were once, you know, the really gold standard of journalism in America. The fact that they were willing to do that, I think, just further reveals the hypocrisy of most mainstream media in this country, and that anything that is anti-Trump, whether it's relevant, whether it's forthright, whether it's accurate, if it's anti-Trump, it's fit to print in their minds. And so I think that actually works in the president's favor. And then the second thing, I think, is, you know, I think the president has largely been disregarded, certainly by sophisticated types, whether in media or politics or business, as a bit of a paranoid when he talks about deep state or the swamp. And I think this shows us, this anonymous letter, that even within his own administration, there are people who believe more in the permanent political class, in the administrative state you were just talking about, than they do in the agenda of the people. And so, and it's a bipartisan situation. It's a bipartisan crony establishment system that exists for its own self-aggrandizement to the detriment of the American people, and particularly working-class American people. So I think that it's paradoxically going to work in his favor. It already is. Well,
the combination of the Woodward book and the exchange, or the excerpts that were released, the audio of Woodward's exchange with the president on the telephone that was released, suggesting people saying some things that were not very complimentary of the president. Mattis and Kelly, now they've both denied they said anything of the sort that Woodward reported in his book, apparently. But that plus the op-ed, I wonder, you've had some personal interactions with the president. You have people rallying to his defense this week, explaining their personal interactions, which sound productive, like Nikki Haley. What have your personal interactions been like?
Yeah, my talks with the president have been very opposite of those that are described by mainstream media. I find him to be, when the cameras are off, a pretty scholarly and honestly more of a listener than anything else, but a really studious leader more than anything. I can see, it's obvious to me why he was so successful as an entrepreneur, because he really values advice and often disparate and conflicting advice, and listens more than he talks, quite frankly. I'm sure that'll shock people, but that's really what he's like in private. I also think that the reason, look, I'll be the first to acknowledge there's been way too much upheaval on the White House staff, and that is a problem, and it's been a constant irritant to him. It's been a constant distraction. I think part of the reason, though, is he came into office, in many ways, our first real third-party president, or at least first in a heck of a long time. Of course, he was elected as a Republican, but he fought so much against the Republican establishment that he came into office without this natural cadre, of thousands of qualified people ready to take important posts. This was really an electoral revolt, and because of that, it was a much more entrepreneurial approach to the presidency, which has its positives and negatives. On the positive side, I think what we're seeing going on in this country is amazing. We got fantastic jobs data out just about 45 minutes ago today. Unbelievable wage numbers. So things are going great beyond the Beltway. But on the negative side, like any startup in business and in the private sector, I think we're seeing, real growing pains and real problems and fits and starts. I think things are continuing to getting better, but I'll be the first to admit it's been a tempest at times, that White House staff.
I want to get your take on another matter that's more significant than politics, and that's faith. I know you're Catholic. Pope Francis had this to say at a mass this week about the sex abuse scandal, that he will not address the Vigano testimony, the 11-page detailed letter that he will not address. This is what he suggested to the faithful.
Silenzio e preghiera.
Silence and prayer. That's what Pope Francis recommended to followers Monday at a daily mass as a response to those who only seek scandal, who seek only division, who seek only destruction, even within the family.
How do you respond to Pope Francis and, by extension, one of his chief flacks, Cardinal Cupich?
Right. It's really hard to take, quite honestly, as somebody who loves the church, went to all Catholic school. It's nonsense, quite frankly, for him to say silence is the answer. Silence largely got us here to this point of incredible scandal for the church and what harm it's doing, not just to the church itself, but to the entire world when you don't have the church operating in the manner in which it should. And specifically here in Chicago, Cardinal Cupich's comments, I said this on Twitter, I think he needs to resign. When he said that we have more important matters, that more important than protecting innocent children against sexual predators, more important than that are social justice warrior agendas, things like talking about climate change and talking about open borders, which is essentially where he is on migrant issues. That is just, it's so insulting that to me he has really squandered whatever leadership credibility he had. I'm talking about Cardinal Cupich, and I sadly think that might also extend to the Pope. He hasn't been quite as brazen as Cardinal Cupich, but in my view, we need, at least in the American church, a wholesale. I think just about every bishop should resign. I really do. I think it's that systemic, it's that corrupt, and even the ones who are good and worthy, which I'm sure is most of them, I think should still be willing to take that very drastic step to say we have failed as a leadership group, and we need to be replaced with a fresh group if the church is to go forward constructively.
Sticking locally, you're a Chicago resident who I assume will probably be appealing for asylum at Mar-a-Lago in the wake of with the prospect of what did Scott Shellady call the two of them? Pritzker and Tony Preckwinkle as your governor and mayor, respectively. Comment on those two individuals and those races.
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, I will tell you, unfortunately, look, I love this city. I can't wait to cheer the Bears on Sunday night. I bleed orange and blue for the Chicago Bears, but I have to say that the situation gets worse and worse. And the fiscal nightmare that we face, the violent crime epidemic that we face in the city, it's hard to be optimistic, and it's even harder when you consider that we're going to have probably a governor and mayor that are even worse than the present two that we have, and those are pretty awful. I would argue probably worst big city mayor in America, certainly the worst governor in America, and he's a Republican, at least in name. Mm-hmm. We're going to replace them in all likelihood with people who are even worse. So, unfortunately, I think our future is to become America's Greece. Except without the sunshine, without all that amazing food and history, but all of the insolvency and all of the political nonsense. And it's sad to think about, it really is, but I just think that's the reality.
All right. He is Steve Cortes, CNN political commentator and the head of Trump's Hispanic Advisory Council. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet. Have a great weekend.
You too. And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.